Go! Thank God we don't have to go all the way down. Something feels very wrong in there. Holman, go left. Professor to the right. Artyom, cover me. We need to go there. But how can we open this gate, huh? Any ideas? Artyom? Great job, Artyomka. Holman, let's go. Now quiet. Come on.
Subcategory number 2 is about our fellow species here on Gaia. Since most species are a great deal complex and most species are genetically more similar than dissimilar, and we even share evolutionary past with them, it's very plausible that we have inherited and shared traits in common. It's in fact not rare that we have looked back on our closest relatives, the bonobos and the chimpanzees for example, to explain our own human nature, which can be read in the blank slate. So if we find social behaviors within other species who are considered to be driven by their nature and not acting on learned behavior, and this is discovered consistently and there is valid theories that explains from an evolutionary perspective why this is, then if we find these social behaviors within man as well, it's more plausible than not that this is a natural genetic behavior and not learned behavior that many related species just by mere chance happen to pick up. Okay, let's shut off this. As already stated previously, scientists oftentimes look back at our evolutionary past to explain current human behaviors. If species whose ancestry we share are discovered to share our behavior, then we know that it's more likely than not that this behavior of ours is innate and inherited. So let's look at our closest relative, the chimpanzee, and see if we cannot find racism expressed by their species. Before showing the conclusion, I'd like to first show you the family tree. But perhaps Dawkins can do a better job at explaining our shared ancestry.
People often ask me, if we're descended from chimpanzees, how come there are still chimpanzees? Well, we're not descended from chimpanzees. We're both descended from a common ancestor who lived there. That common ancestor then produced two branches, one of which went to us humans, and one of which went to chimpanzees, branching further.
Now that we've seen that, let's move on to what scientists has to say about the relatedness and behavioral similarities between man and chimps, and how we study chimpanzees to discover the possible origin of human behaviors.
That's right, man the toolmaker is how we were defined when I was growing up. And so Lewis said, now we have to redefine man, redefine tool, or accept chimps as humans. Louis Leakey suggested chimps, and how amazing, because of all the animals, they're the most like us. So they helped me to persuade other scientists, and to some extent, religious people, that there isn't a sharp line dividing us from the others. It's a blurry line. And chimps are so like us biologically as well that you can't really argue against it.
So what's very interesting is that when we see that male chimps stay in their natal communities with their brothers and their fathers and their relatives. They are territorial, they defend their territories. And this, in many ways, resembles what we see in a lot of human societies.
We've decided, we've categorized it, and that's that.
It's very easy for us to want to shut off our relationship to them and think we're extraordinarily different. Most of the studies are done on captive apes. They're shifted around from zoo to zoo. And you can imagine if you took 2-year-old children and put them in a cage and sprayed it down every day and gave them chow and apples to eat, and in a city, didn't raise them in a family, didn't get to go to Cub Scouts, didn't get to go to the circus, didn't get to go to the mall, they wouldn't become human. In order to understand ourselves as humans, we need to understand through the lens or the mirror of another species that's very closely related to us, many aspects of our behavior.
Since there is some small portion of our genes that are unique from the other primates, what do we know about what about our behavior is caused by our unique genes?
And so they sequenced the human genome now about a decade ago, and about 5 years ago the chimp genome was sequenced, and it was possible to finally sit with these 2-mile-long printouts and see what was in common and it turns out that we share like 98.9% of our DNA with chimps. It was absolutely true, and it was not based on ridiculous guesses in the 1980s when that soundbite first came out. It was based on very solid science, some that was done at Berkeley. Then the sequence comes out, and yes, indeed, there is that much overlap. So of course the question then becomes, where's the differences? What are the genetics of what distinguishes us from chimps? We keel over with certain diseases that chimps don't. We can survive tuberculosis for years. Chimps don't. They can handle simian AIDS in ways that we can't, the human version. So it's differences in immune function, some aspects of reproductive isolation, so you're unlikely to get chimp-human hybrids. All that accounts for almost all the genetic differences. Where are the genes that are relevant to the brain? And it turns out there's hardly any. And the few that have been identified make perfect sense, because these are not genes that make it possible for us to have metaphor, or genes that, because going back to that first slide, we've got the same nervous system basically that chimps do. There's only one difference, which is we've got like 3 times as many neurons. And what the genetic differences are genes having to do with the number of rounds of cell division during fetal brain development. Essentially what that says is, take a chimp brain fetally and let it go 2 or 3 more rounds of division, and you get a human brain instead, and out come symphonies and ideology and hopscotch and everything else there. What that tells you is, with enough quantity, you invent quality.
Unfortunately, this is the kind of moving into the dark side of chimpanzee and human nature. We used to think it was only humans who waged war, but we find that chimpanzees, like humans, have this rather unpleasant ability to create an in-group and an out-group.
Yeah, you sort of broke our hearts, you had us, you raised our spirits about animals and chimpanzee life, and then all of a sudden, in comes the big surprise, which is, once you start looking at warfare, all the terrible things that we also hope were only uniquely ours.
Well, don't say I broke your hearts, they broke mine, and you shared my grief. But, sadly, the saddest part of learning all that is that it made them seem even more like us than they had before.
Unfortunately.
And unfortunately, but I've been criticized by some of my scientific colleagues. You shouldn't publish this stuff. You shouldn't publish descriptions of inter-community aggression, which is like warfare, because that will indicate that we have innate aggressive tendencies.
Validates the bad side of human behavior.
Well, yes, I do believe we have innate aggressive tendency. I don't honestly think you can look around the world today and deny that that must be true.
As stated, we share ancestry and thus behavioral traits with chimpanzees. Is such a trait what could be described as racism? Because if yes, then it's more likely than not that racism is innate, inherited, and natural for humans as well. Now, as we already went over in main category number 1's subcategory number 4, welfare, ethnicity, and altruism, chimpanzees are more altruistic and willing to share with members of their own tribe based on ancestry. Studies have revealed that chimpanzees are territorial and that they have a strong emotional connection to their family. I will here show one such territorial dispute in action before moving on to the studies and conclusion regarding our closest relative.
These calls announce the start of a raid into land controlled by their neighbors. As they leave their core zone, the patrol goes silent, occasionally stopping to listen. Signs of the enemy are detected and examined closely. The chimp militia are now at the very edge of their territory. All need to be on maximum alert. They must wait and listen. An unfamiliar chimp call raises the tension. It's an uncertain time. The size of the rival group is as yet unknown. The patrol moves off with a sense of purpose. They must remain silent until they close in on their rivals. Others are not so fortunate. The battle won, a grisly scene unfolds. But exactly why they cannibalized the dead chimp is not fully understood. It may simply be a chance for some extra protein.
Other studies have revealed that monkeys and chimpanzees' aggressive xenophobia evolved independently in the absence of any experience with adults and in early infancy. So, as the evidence show, chimpanzees and monkeys and great apes, primates, are in fact racist and is very likely to be inherited since it's observable in early infancy. And since we share this behavior and we also share ancestry, it is so far very likely that this behavior is inherited, innate, and thus natural. That racism is natural. But let's observe if racism runs deeper than our caveman history, our human evolution, and as observed here, even deeper than our closest relative. Because, again, if yes, then this just increased the chance that this is indeed a innate, inherited, natural behavior.